Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is the last day of November. That's right, we're turning a corner, headed towards Christmas. It is November 30th, 2023. I'm Barry Stagner. Very glad to have you with us, and I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. We certainly did. Always enjoy getting together with the family and eating too much and laughing and talking and having fellowship together. So here we are now moving toward December. And I have to say, with every turn of the calendar, I get more and more expectant of the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. And, I think we need to remember, I've been teaching through Second Timothy on Sundays, and there's a passage, some believe it to be part of a poem or a song, where we're told that if we are faithless, he remains faithful because he cannot deny himself. And our God is so good. He's good to us in the midst of these stormy seasons and difficulties. And it's interesting because Hosea tells us, I think it's 5:15, that in their affliction the Jews are going to call on the name of the Lord. And boy, are they in the midst of it now. And it's interesting to see some of the footage. I'm sure some of you who follow Amir have seen some of the clips of soldiers before they go into battle or for their assignment. Oh, they're gathering to pray. And these are those who are not Orthodox Jews, but just secular Jews, so to speak. And yet, this time and season of great tragedy and difficulty is calling them back to the Lord. And so we have much to be thankful for as Christians today. The Lord has told us what to look for when it's time to look up because our redemption is nigh. And we are seeing those things beginning to come to pass. And that's when you start looking up. And so just want to encourage you in the midst of all the difficult things we'll talk about this week, as we do every week, that God is on the throne and he is in control. He has foreseen all this and therefore foretold all this. And we can know that what he had written by the Holy Spirit through the hands of men is going to come to pass exactly as it is written. And that should just give us such great confidence in our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, because he promised that he was going to come again and bring us to where he is. So where he is, we may be also. And that is the great hope that we have in the midst of perilous times. Well, let's jump into our stories. Of course, we have to talk about Israel. And the Jewish News Syndicate reports that the IDF has been shelling targets in southern Lebanon. And we have to remember that, most of the talk has been of late on the northern border of Israel, on the eastern side of the northern border, which is the country of Syria. And we do need to talk about that because the Iranians, the Russians, and the Turkish armies have presence there. And these are three of the five named nations in the Ezekiel invasion. But we also know that Lebanon is on the north, and it's on the northwestern side of the northern border of Israel, or the western side of the northern border of Israel, and there's activity there as well. So we know the nations are going to be drawn down out of the north, and of course Hezbollah being a proxy for the Iranians and carrying out their will on the northern border. And the numbers have fluctuated some over the years, but there's over 100,000 missiles aimed at rockets aimed at Israel from Hezbollah on Israel's northwestern border in the country of Lebanon. So the Israeli Defense Forces shelled targets in southern Lebanon on Tuesday, according to Reuters, and there was no immediate confirmation from the IDF. And Israel has responded to multiple daily attacks from Hezbollah terrorists during the war against the Hamas terror group in Gaza. But the border has been mostly quiet since a temporary pause in the fighting in the Strip took effect last Friday. And the IDF Chief of Staff General Herzi Halevi met on Tuesday with the heads of the authorities in northern Israel, and hundreds of thousands of residents have been evacuated from the northern and southern frontiers since the Hamas massacre of October 7th and the ensuing war. We made a difficult decision to evacuate the residents in the north, and I am full of appreciation for the way you show resilience and patience and allow us to fight, said Halevi. We will plan to work together with the heads of the authorities on the return of the residents and its timing and dialogue, and with the understanding that we will not be able to return to the reality that existed here before the war. And that's a very telling statement. And I think that's important for us to pause because there is coming a point where the world is going to reach the point of no return, and the prophetic narrative is going to advance without hesitation or further delay. And we've watched down through the years. I think many of us remember back in 1991 with what was going on with Saddam Hussein and the invasion of Kuwait. Uh, Boy, churches instantly packed, and everybody was wondering, okay, there's a potential war in the Middle East. Is this the Ezekiel war, or will it lead to it? And people were of great interest. And I remember thinking all the way back then in 1991. Some of you may not have been on the planet at that time, but I remember thinking, if this fizzles out, um, churches are going to empty again, and sure, and they did. And I remember in our home church, people were sitting on the floor in the aisles during that Kuwait war with Iraq and all the other things that we saw happen back then. And because it didn't lead to anything of a prophetic significance, that is, um, people just kind of, oh, well, that's just another deal. And prophecy does ebb and flow. It moves forward and then pauses and then moves forward again. And we have all these spokes on a wheel that contribute to the final push forward. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And I think that's a very telling statement from this general that, things are not going to return to the way that they were. And they're different from this point forward. And I would agree with that, just watching the intensity of things happening in our world, and how we have hundreds of thousands, even millions of people around the world with their complete focus on the nation of Israel and the city of Jerusalem, and demands being made for a two-state solution and things of that nature, as we will talk about here in a few moments. Now, the Israel National News, or Arutz Sheva, says an expert on the Middle East says Arabs consider a hostage deal as hudna, or Israel's surrender. And this is one of the things I think that we've seen play out time and time again, where you've got people who are absolutely ignorant of the Middle Eastern mentality and the mentality of groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and even ISIS, and how they think and what they consider to be an honor and what they consider to be a dishonor has just been completely misunderstood by the West, or not even considered. And that's why we have so many dumb decisions coming out of people in places of power here in our own country and elsewhere. And Eric Sheva spoke to Dr. Eddie Cohen, an expert in Eastern affairs, on the way deals for the release of hostages are perceived in the Arab media and on the Arab street. Dr. Cohen believes that to the Arab world, the hostage deal is nothing more than proof of Israel's surrender to Hamas. For them, it is a hudna, meaning a long-term ceasefire known from Islamic history, when Prophet Muhammad made a hudna with his enemies and signed this contract for 10 years. Arab media and social networks state that according to the hudna, Israel has lost and Hamas has won. The proof of this is the fact that they were forced to release imprisoned terrorists, and we have submitted to Hamas dictates regarding the drones that we were not allowed to operate during certain hours. All these bring them to the conclusion that Hamas has been victorious, says Dr. Cohen. And this is telling, and keep this in mind when we talk about a story coming out of the U.S. administration here in a moment. But this mentality, which in a lot of ways is just completely backwards, and yet here, you've got this perspective on their side that says, well, this is victorious because we're getting terrorists back as we release innocent hostages. And that just proves that our hand is the stronger of the two. And, yet at the same time, out of the other side of their mouth, there's calls for, the unfair, disproportionate response of Israel, and accusations of Israel killing its own citizens who were held as hostages there. The report of one family, including a 10-month-old baby, being among those reports coming out of Hamas or Gaza. And again, the Arab society looks at things differently, especially the radical Muslims. They understand that the only sure way to get into paradise is martyrdom. Everybody else is going to have their good works weighed against their bad, and only those who had the good outweigh the bad are going to enter in. But, for the martyr, they get a free pass. They're in. So they don't care about death. And that's why they use their children as human shields, and mothers raise their kids to be martyrs and brag about it, and all these other things. And it just seems like Western culture just doesn't get it, because that kind of thinking is unbelievable to many. And yet here we have it as you've got the what we know to be true regarding the Gaza Strip and Israel's military response, and yet because they're getting terrorists back who were held in Israeli prisons, they see this as a hudna, or a victory on the part of Hamas. Now, Reuters says the UN is calling for a two-state solution to the Israel conflict. The UN, or the United Nothing, on Wednesday called for the international community to move toward a two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, saying Jerusalem should serve as the capital of both states. This has been offered time and time and time again, and the Palestinians always refuse. And as it's been said, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They have had this handed to them, and they have refused it and turned it down. And I watched an Arab Muslim woman this morning give testimony of what happened when Israel turned over the Gaza Strip, and the beautiful greenhouses and the high-rise buildings that could have allowed the Gaza Strip to become another Dubai. And yet, what did Hamas do? They blew up all the greenhouses and caused the people, to lose not just the income and the job opportunities, but also the resources for food. That's what these greenhouses were all about. And Israel has found ways to grow in that unfavorable climate enough to sustain their own people and even export many of the things that they grow. And this was part of what was handed to the Palestinians in Gaza, and they blew them all up. They don't want a two-state solution. They teach their kids that there is no Israel, and that Israel is occupying the land that they have long held, which a quick glance at history tells us that that is absolutely ridiculous. Yet we often have the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres saying Israel and Palestine should live side by side in peace and security, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. Well, first of all, the Gaza Strip is part of Israel. It isn't a second state. I mean, they've given them, a certain amount of freedom, and yet they rely heavily on Israel for much of their day-to-day needs, energy and water and things of that nature. But Israel has tried to live peaceably with them, and they just don't want it. But the West and the UN just can't seem to get that through their head. And looking at the heinous attacks on October 7th tells you what they're all about. And all they want to see is the destruction of Jews and the displacement of Jewish people from their national homeland, which dates back thousands of years. And I think one of the strongest arguments to put the Jews in the land of Israel prior to the existence of anyone named a Palestinian is the fact that Jesus was born as the King of the Jews in Bethlehem, which is in Israel. And he grew up in Nazareth, which is in Israel. And so, again, just a quick glance at history would tell you that the Palestinian people, who are actually Arabs by nationality, they're Jordanians. Many would make the argument. Some Muslim scholars call them Syrian Arabs. But the truth of the matter is, they do not predate the Jews in this particular area. And even if you want to use the name Palestine, which happened in 136 AD by Hadrian, the Roman emperor, because of his hatred for the Jews, he made it illegal to use the word Jew, would not allow two Jews to walk together, killed hundreds of thousands of Jews, and renamed the land after Israel's ancient enemies, the Philistines. Well, Philistine in Latin is Palestina. That's when the name Palestine came about. But remember, this is in 136 AD, 100 years after the King of the Jews was born in Bethlehem, which is in Israel, and grew up in Nazareth, which is in Israel. So just the argument is just a fool's argument, and the UN rightfully carries that moniker, the United Nothing. They do nothing except spend U.S. dollars, as I forget what the percentage is, but the U.S. is by far the largest supporter of the UN, And all they do is basically pen resolutions against Israel, who has every right to the land historically and even legally in the international community. It is the land of the Jews. The New York Times, and here's what I was talking about a couple of moments ago. The U.S. has warned Israel to fight more surgically in Gaza, officials say. The United States has warned Israel that it must fight more surgically and avoid further mass displacement of Palestinians in its war against Hamas to avoid a humanitarian crisis that overwhelms the world's ability to respond, according to senior Biden administration officials. The White House has told Israel that replicating the scale of its bombardment in the northern Gaza as it makes an expected push into southern Gaza once the recent pause in fighting ends would produce a crisis beyond the capacity of any humanitarian support network, the officials said on Monday night. The UN has said the fighting has already displaced most of Gaza's population of 2.2 million people. How many billions have to be given to these people and how many miles of tunnels have to be built for somebody to wake up and say, you know what, they've got to bear some responsibility in this. And, of course, the innocent civilian loss of life. Nobody is for that. Nobody wants that. Nobody celebrates that. Unlike the Palestinian people who celebrate the death of Jews in the streets and pass out candy. Nobody's doing that in Israel. Everybody wants this to come to an end. Everybody wants to see these hostilities brought to an end. But again, Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. Remember, the Hebrew word Hamas means violence, and that's all Israel ever gets from Gaza. And Hamas has to go. It's just that simple. And Netanyahu said there's no way that they're going to bring an end to this fighting, even after the ceasefire and the exchange of hostages. And, again, just considering this particular mentality that the world has and these lunatics that are marching around the world waving flags and, especially those waving a pride flag and saying, I'm gay and for Palestine. Well, you wouldn't be for Palestine if you were in Palestine because they'd either arrest you or throw you off the roof of a building to your death. And again, this just highlights the lunacy that's happening in our world today. And now the U.S. says to the Jews, they warn them that they need to be more careful about the wide scale casualties that they're doing everything they can to avoid. I mean, what country goes in and tells people, we're going to bomb this area, so you need to evacuate? And it gives them days and days of notice. And then because their own people are shooting them when they try to escape, they line the roads with tanks to protect the people who are their adversaries so they could get to safer ground before Israel blows up the buildings that were housing Hamas operatives and infrastructure. So again, it's just the world has lost its mind. And aren't you glad that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind? We have a sound mind even in the midst of all this. So, I have to say, I think, what the U.S. is doing is just, again, foolish. And, Genesis 12:3 still stands. The Lord said to Abraham that in you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And that's a messianic prophecy. And it's still coming to pass. The first portion of Genesis 12:3. People are still blessed by the coming one, the one who has come and is coming again, and people are still getting saved all over the world. So the blessing portion of that is still true. And therefore, the second half, I will bless those who bless you, speaking of the descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob, and I will curse those who curse you. And, it's interesting that those two words, I will curse those who curse you, um, the word means the first word means exactly what we think, that there will be a spoken indictment against them and even God's wrath against them. But the second word, curse, means to think little of. The Lord says, I will act against those who think little of Israel. And we see that happening today. And, again, just these foolish statements coming out, when you got people using children as human shields and all that, these heinous things, there's no mention of that on the part of the U.S. And even though we've heard some rumblings in that regard, and there's been some pretty strong talk But again, it's Israel, Israel, Israel is the focal point of all the condemnation. Breitbart tells us, and this is kind of interesting, and I think everybody, wants to see people have opportunity to succeed, and the minimum wage, especially here in California, hitting that $20 mark and all. Everybody said this is going to have consequences, and the man on the street's going to wind up paying. And it's also been said, flipping hamburgers was never meant to be anybody's career. That's the job of young people who just start out, who need to be learning how to show up for work and to dress properly and greet the public and do all those things. So the article coming from Breitbart says Bidenomics, a Big Mac extra value meal now sells for $18, up from $10 in 2018. A Big Mac, a medium beverage, and a medium fry now cost $18 in some locations, up $10 in 2018 when Trump was president. And the skyrocketing costs could impact the 2024 election as soaring inflation under President Biden reflects poorly on his economic plan of so-called Bidenomics. The Big Mac value meals price increase is just one example of continued inflation, the New York Post editorial board reported. Those parentheses, President Biden's terrible economic policies have driven prices overall about 15% higher since Biden came in on essentials like food and energy. They're up closer to 25%. Equivalently, think of it as having slashed the income of a typical family by close to $5,000. Mortgage rates are cruising toward 8% as the median home price hovers near $420,000. Over half of voters in key swing states said grocery prices are the top way inflation has impacted their budget. Bloomberg reported on Monday, and according to this Bloomberg News Consult poll, a pound of ground beef now costs $5.23 on average, up from $3.89 in January of 2020. Coffee's up $2 a pound. Prices for fresh fruits and vegetables are up nearly 14%. And at one point, a carton of eggs was triple its pre-pandemic price. And Biden appears oblivious to the soaring costs. And during a speech on Monday, he bragged about the prices of turkey, gas, air travel, and the cost of items actually increased after the cost of items actually increased under his leadership. From turkey to air travel to a tank of gas, costs went down, he said. Now, I don't know what planet this guy's from, but it's part of the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals. You just keep telling a lie and telling a lie and telling a lie. And after enough people are telling it, it's going to be believed as truth. And that's exactly the type of thing we see here in just bold face standing in front of a microphone in front of the whole nation and just saying things that aren't true. And again, pointing back to Isaiah 2 and 3, which we like to mention rather frequently, one of the consequences of rejecting the Lord is God sending into, at the time that he is about to shake the earth, incompetent leadership all over the world. And boy, do we have it today. Breitbart also says, and this is a rather disturbing story, but it feeds right into what Jesus said in Matthew 24, 3-8. The headline reads, and listen to this, excuse me, stab white people. Murder in French village could be the tipping point for society, warns the government. The French government has issued a plea against vigilantism in the wake of the slaying of a teenager in rural France by a group reported to have shouted, "Stab white people." A representative of Emmanuel Macron's French government has now visited the rural community of Crépole, where over a week ago a gang of, quote, outsiders, end quote, raided the annual village dance and stabbed several people, excuse me, killing 16-year-old Thomas. It is reported witnesses heard the attackers say, "We are here to stab white people." In remarks that followed not only the attack, but which appeared to have been more aimed at the reaction among the public to the brutal attack, government spokesman Olivier Véran said the state shared the pain of those impacted, but warned people should not be tempted to take the law into their own hands. And Véran said it was for the judiciary to dispense justice, not the French people, and that there was a risk of society reaching a tipping point over the attack and response, reports Le Figaro. He said, "Can't stand these violent gangs anymore? We neither." What cost Thomas's life was neither a news item nor a brawl. there was a risk of our society. There is a risk of our society tipping over if we are not up to the task. We do not respond to violence with violence, but with justice. People just are so far out there. Romans 13 makes it very clear that the government has the God-given responsibility to punish evil. And yet here we have all over the world nations who are protecting it and warning the citizenry not to protect themselves. And it's an insane world that we live in. And let me pause and remind you, Jesus is coming soon. And I'm glad that we have that blessed hope. It was claimed that some of the young people who launched the attack on Crepe Pole Dance had traveled from a couple of Roman cities or French cities. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this multi-hyphened name. And the prosecution said this ultra-right group had gone there to exact revenge for the death among those in court. Were reported to have been a soldier, a computer developer, and students between the ages of 18 through 25. And there were some, as the article says, who were motivated to strike back. And the public prosecutor again warned no one can take justice into their own hands outside the law, and that anyone who tried would be punished. And again, this is the migration issue that is impacting so many countries today. And yet, you've got countries like Poland who have taken no migrants in. They're criticized in the international community and other countries. And again, when you've got the mentality that Sharia law is the only judicial system that is allowable under your ideology or belief system, you're going to move. And England is learning this quickly, and there may not be any hope for that country anymore, at least for being any type of democracy. They believe that they have to make sure this happens, and they have the responsibility to have a global caliphate. And, so again, just the thinking, applying Western thinking to this ideology just isn't going to float, and it's not going to work. And the citizenry are paying the consequences for this. And the government has a responsibility to protect the innocent from the evil. And that's the word of the Lord. And the Telegraph reports in putting labels, we're switching gears here a little bit. The Telegraph reports in putting labels on newborn babies, the trans ideology has reached peak madness. Checking out of a hospital with your newborn baby is a magical if bleary moment. I can scarcely remember signing the forms, this woman says, let alone registering my daughter's birth, but I'm sure that I would have done a double take if I'd seen her described as gender fluid, intersex, gender variant, third gender, or indeed genderless rather than female. Nevertheless, the parents of babies born within the past few weeks at King's College Hospital, Guy's, or St. Thomas Hospital might want to check with their general practitioners that their offspring haven't whimsically been classified as astrogender, a fluid gender identity that transitions from male to female, non-binary, depending upon the current configuration of the night sky, or indeed alien gender, a gender that is an interpretation of a gender or genders from a non-human perspective, by the midwives who were only given the option of selecting baby's gender identity rather than sex on the new NHSIT system that recently went live across several London teaching hospitals. I've chosen two of the most absurd gender identities to make a point, but obviously this is no laughing matter, the article says. A baby's discharge summaries contain vital health information about the birth and form a part of a patient's permanent NHS health record that is shared with that child's general practitioner, health visitors, and other hospitals in order to ensure the best postnatal care. So, like the epic new computer system set to be rolled out by at least 6 more trusts nationwide, this is supposedly state of the art, and this technology is going to cost the taxpayers £450 million over the next 15 years and will unlikely diminish the anger prompted by the expose in the Mail on Sunday, revealing this gender fluidity and this way to identify a child's sex or gender, if you will. Given the NHS's track record of removing the word women or mother from some health service wording, to cite just one example of wokery, this seems to be an awfully convenient computer glitch, which they blamed it on. Indeed, the whistleblower was keen to stress that a climate of fear reigns among midwives, with staff apparently still being encouraged to use terms like birthing parent and chest feeding, despite previous backlashes. And all this confirms the fear that when an ideology has been promoted for years, with anyone questioning it immediately silenced by that one word, transphobic, certain people and sectors will continue to push it despite new guidance or even changes in the law. Again, Jesus is coming. What a crazy, crazy, mixed up, messed up people we have become. The Western Journal says Attorney General calls out Biden an admin plan that would effectively ban Christians from fostering children. Many progressives can't stand Christians. The solution? Get rid of Christians. How? Go after the children. In a bold move to cement, and this just underscores who's behind all this. The only one who comes to steal, kill, and destroy is orchestrating all of these things. And in a bold move to cement radical left ideology into mainstream, the Biden administration is attempting to institute a new rule that would effectively ban Christians from becoming foster parents. The Department of Health and Human Services' safe and appropriate foster care placement requirements seek to ensure that foster parents and families use a foster child's identified pronouns, chosen name, and allow the child to dress in an age-appropriate manner that the child believes reflects their self-identified gender identity and expression. What the proposal doesn't say is that any faithful Christian family could not, in good conscience, follow the rules, so faithful Christians would be denied the opportunity to help kids in need of foster homes. It also doesn't say the requirement would effectively gut the foster care system because it relies on people of faith to provide for children in need. And now 19 Republican attorney generals are demanding the Biden administration change course from the radical ideological plan to exclude Christians from the foster care program. And the letter, co-signed by 18 other GOP state attorney generals, was addressed to Aisa Schomburg, Associate Commissioner in the Children's Bureau, part of the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families in the Department of Health and Human Services. And the proposed rule infringes on the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech, fundamental rights preserved by the First Amendment, the letter says. The Supreme Court has repeatedly rejected attempts by the government to exclude foster care providers based on religious beliefs or to mandate speech on private actors. So, again, anything to do with God, they want out of the system. They don't want children being, and this is all what Marxists and communists do. And that's what we've got in places of power in our country, sadly, today. And, the Lord, I think we need to keep in mind what Jesus said about messing with kids. And that's a very loose paraphrase. But if you cause them to stumble, it'd be better if you had a millstone hung around your neck and you'd be thrown into the sea. And, again, I think we need to remember that one of the things that is obvious today is that, and what the Bible presents to us, is that there are times where the only way to stop the moral and spiritual slide of a culture or a world is God's judgment. And that's what's happening. And that's what's coming, I should say. And, just listening to these things that ridding the country of any Christian influence, because the woke progressive left doesn't want that kind of influence, and to say things that are against science that they're always promoting and accusing Christians of being as anti-science. And yet most of what they believe and push as an agenda today is not just unscientific, it's just plain stupid. And this is what they're shoving down people's throats. And that's how they want to destroy Christianity, is by capturing the next generation. You know who said that's how you do it? Adolf Hitler. Capture the youth, and you've captured a nation. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. So, listen, don't bury your head in the sand and think this isn't an evil agenda and it's just, something that's going to pass. There's a point in time where things are going to, as we talked about in our first story, things are going to be different, and they're going to be different permanently. And the only solution is going to be the return of Jesus to meet the church in the air, and then the return of Jesus to the earth with the church to rule and reign in righteousness for 1,000 years. Now, we talked a few weeks ago about the population problem in China and the fact that they are just years away. They've been in zero population growth for some time, but now they've burdened themselves because of their one child per family rule and the massive numbers of abortions that they have committed over there, and the preference of having male babies to carry on the family name, and the shortage of females to give birth, and what this is doing to China's future, which is basically destroying it. Breitbart reports that Xi Jinping tells Chinese women to get married and make babies. Frustrated by his inability to counter China's rapidly declining birth rate, Director Xi Jinping abandoned his rhetorical commitment to gender equality at a meeting with the All China Women's Federation and told women to start getting married and having babies to secure China's future because those who have done the math on this zero population growth or negative population growth have said it's over for China. They're doomed. Their abortions and limiting families to one child has killed their future. And so he's still trying to save the day, so to speak. It's necessary to guide women to play their unique role in carrying forward the traditional virtues of the Chinese nation and establishing good family virtues to create a new trend of family civilization, Xi said at the meeting in early November. Only with harmonious families, good family education, and correct family traditions can children be raised and society develop in a healthy manner, he contended. Xi said his regime would actively cultivate a new culture of marriage and childbearing, including more enthusiastic guidance for young people who do not grasp that marrying young and raising large families is part of their duty to the nation. This is the country that said you could only have one kid. And now listen to this double talk. The young people need to understand it's their duty to marry young and raise large families. And to that end, Xi said the Chinese Communist Party will seek to organize and motivate women to contribute their strength to the Chinese modernization, by which he meant motivating them to give birth to the generation that will do the modernizing. And again, people ask about China, what's their role? According to what we read a few weeks ago, China has no role in the future other than their population reducing to about 400 million by the year 2050, if we're here that long, which I just can't see us being here until 20. Well, I know I won't be unless I live to be 100 and something. But anyway, I plan on going with the rest of you in the group plan here very soon, in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, and putting on that absolute glorious Christ-like body that Philippians 3:20 tells us awaits us. Now, one last pair of stories, and it's kind of interesting as we talk about what's happening out there in the skies of the cosmos, knowing that the heavens will be active and demonstrating that the end is at hand. Signs in the heavens, signs in the sun, moon, and stars, as the song and saying goes. But the Business Insider says a cluster of sunspots 15 times bigger than the Earth could send a solar storm our way as early as Saturday. A cluster of sunspots has rolled into view of Earth and may send a solar storm our way as early as Saturdays, and the cluster includes about a dozen sunspots that are around 125,000 miles wide, about 15 times bigger than our planet, Space.com reported. The group is very active. It had already shot out 3 M-class and several C-class solar flares before it came into view, per spaceweather.com. M-class flares are medium-sized eruptions. When directed toward Earth, they can cause brief radio blackouts, according to the European Space Agency. C-class solar flares, meanwhile, are minor and have little effect when they hit the Earth. And the sun was sporting a cluster of sunspots on November 23rd of 2023, which caused space weather experts to keep a close eye on the cluster as it now is nearing its lineup with Earth. And groups of sunspots are regions that we pay close attention to, according to the professor of space and climate physics at University College in London. And these are complex magnetic fields that are more likely to become the sources of flares and coronal mass ejections. Now, one more story on the subject, and this comes from a website called The Conversation. It deals with science issues and things of that nature. And it says Earth's magnetic field protects life on Earth from radiation, but it can move, and the magnetic poles can even flip. Now, pole shifts or polar axis shifts, where the North becomes the South Pole and vice versa, been looked at and poo-pooed by many as just science fiction or conspiracy, but it's not that at all. It's reality. It happens. The debate in the scientific community is not whether or not it happens, but how fast it happens. Some say it takes 1,000 years or more. Others say they can flip instantaneously, causing cataclysmic results on the Earth's surface, which would line up with what we see happening during the tribulation period. Ofer Cohen works for the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and the university benefits from any public article written by one of its faculty in terms of exposure and visibility. And I should have skipped that. It was just introducing the article, sorry. But the Earth's magnetic field plays a big role in protecting people from hazardous radiation and geomagnetic activity that could affect satellite communication and the operation of power grids, and it moves. Scientists have studied and tracked the motion of the magnetic poles for centuries. The historical movement of these poles indicates a change in the global geometry of the Earth's magnetic field. It may even indicate the beginning of a field reversal, a flip between the north and south magnetic poles. I'm a physicist who studies the interaction between the planets and space, the article says. While the north magnetic pole moving a little bit isn't a big deal, a reversal could have a big impact on Earth's climate and our modern technology, but these reversals don't happen instantaneously. Instead, they occur over thousands of years. And there are those who would argue that that's not true. The North Magnetic Pole's observation locations from 1831 to 2007 are pictured in a model that tells us how quickly the Earth's magnetic field is moving, and it states that the Earth isn't the only planet with a magnetic field. Planets like Jupiter have magnetic or metallic hydrogen layer that generates their magnetic fields. And these conducting layers may have some local irregular motions due to local turbulence or smaller flows that don't follow the large-scale pattern. And these are called anomalies, where a planet's magnetic field or places the field that deviates from a perfect dipole field, meaning a north and south pole. And the Earth's magnetic field creates a magnetic bubble called the magnetosphere above the uppermost part of the atmosphere, the ionosphere layer. The magnetosphere plays a major role in protecting people. It shields and deflects damaging high-energy cosmic radiation, which is created in star explosions and moves constantly through the universe. The magnetosphere also interacts with solar wind, which is a flow of magnetized gas sent out from the sun. And the article goes on to talk about how far the pole has moved since they started tracking it, some 600 miles since the first measurement taken in 1831. And the migration speed has increased from 10 miles an hour to 34 miles an hour per year in more recent years. Now, remember, the sun in Revelation 16 and the bowl judgments is given the power to scorch men's bodies. So I believe that it is most likely that the magnetosphere is going to be broken down by a massive, probably G-class coronal mass ejection, where the sun erupts and these groups of sunspots possibly will send something that is of a greater magnitude than the magnetosphere can deflect. And for a short time, the length of the solar flare, the sun will be given power to scorch men's bodies with radiation burns. And this will be followed by a painful cold if you follow the progression through the bowl judgments in Revelation 16. Now, one more story and we'll call it a night. And this comes from Live Science, and kind of an interesting, not so scientific headline for the article. Big blob of hot water in the Pacific may be making El Nino act weirdly. El Nino is in full swing and will likely remain strong this winter, but its effect on weather patterns in the U.S. depend on the behavior of an unusually warm blob in the Western Pacific, a blob of water, obviously. A weird blob of warm water that has appeared in the Western Pacific seems to be making this year's strong El Nino behave unexpectedly, reports the Washington Post. The blob is located in the West Central Pacific near the international date line. a north-south boundary that separates two consecutive calendar dates. Paul Roundy, a professor of atmospheric science at the University of Albany, told the newspaper El Nino usually triggers a warming in the eastern tropical Pacific, which in turn shapes the atmospheric conditions and weather patterns across North America and around the world. And while this year's El Nino event comes as no surprise, experts warned it could be a big one in May. The atmospheric response looks nothing like other recent strong El Nino events. Todd Crawford, a meteorologist at the weather forecasting consultancy Atmospheric G2, wrote on X. And during typical El Nino years, warm waters in the eastern tropical Pacific heat the air above, cause it to rise, but that's not happening. Experts told the Washington Post because the air is rising in the western Pacific instead, and some of this air may be blowing east and suppressing the rising motion usually seen there, they said. And rising air creates low pressure conditions associated with showers and thunderstorms, and the warm blob in the western Pacific is causing more tropical rain to fall there, which in turn reduces the intensity of the rainfall further east because the air that rises in the West Pacific thunderstorm subsides back toward the surface, toward the surface farther east, drying the atmosphere. Now, El Nino may be behaving abnormally this year because of lingering effects from a rare triple dip of La Nina events, El Nino's Chile counterpart. La Nina produced a sustained cooling effect around the equator and eastern tropical Pacific over the last 3 years and probably hasn't completely washed out, Crawford told the Washington Post. And high ocean temperatures resulting from human-caused climate change, you know they had to throw that in, are also to blame for the unusual warmth in the western Pacific. Well, what about the unusual cold we just talked about for the last 3 years? What caused that? It's just ridiculous. Strong El Nino conditions could persist through the northern hemisphere winter and last until spring of 2024, according to the National Weather Service. And again, this causing weather patterns to change. And we've been hearing a lot. It's funny how the media catches a phrase from a scientist or something, and all of a sudden that's all you ever hear. And we've, in the past couple of years, been hearing about atmospheric rivers. And this El Nino event would definitely affect the jet stream and the flow of storms and all that. So again, another weather anomaly that reminds us that, the heavens are going to act up when it's time for the Lord to come. And we're seeing those types of things happen as well, all the way out to the sun and these sunspots, and then right here in the waters of the earth. So, well, all that tells us that Jesus is coming soon. And we should be out there telling people things they don't want to hear, and just remembering that we're living around people who are going to go into the Great Tribulation. And we have a responsibility to warn them of what's coming. Even if they laugh at your face right now, they won't be laughing when we're gone. And the words that we share are going to carry a weight after our departure. And when they start seeing the things that you described to them, the man of sin rising to power from the revived Roman Empire, at least the geographic region of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, Rome at its zenith. And this man solves the Middle East crisis, helps the Jews rebuild the temple. You start feeding people that, and like I said, as they might scoff and laugh at you now, it won't be so funny when they watch you go down. And we need to be warning people of what's coming. And, there are those who say, if you heard the gospel before the rapture, you can't get saved after the rapture. And I don't agree with that at all, because few people respond to the gospel the first time they hear it. Some do, but for the most part, according to what the Bible says, one plants, another waters, and another reaps. That's the progression that happens most of the time. And therefore, we need to be planting those seeds now that others can water. And during the tribulation, hopefully they will be reaped. So let's be faithful to what we've been called to do and be, and that is witnesses for Christ. He gave us the power to do so. And we need to make sure we are using that power not for entertainment's sake or experiential sake, but we are using that power to spread the gospel around the world. And, one of the things I think that we always need to keep in mind is that, Mark's gospel ends with a reference to the fact that there were signs that confirmed the word. And they weren't, for show and tell. They weren't for, just a fun experience for Christians to sit around and watch God move and do stuff. But they were so people could come to faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when we put the Great Commission first, the signs and wonders will follow. Today, we got people following signs and wonders instead of signs and wonders following the people and the people who are preaching and being faithful. And so let's be faithful to tell others about Jesus, who is the world's only Savior. And there's no other way that one can be saved. You can't be saved by good works. Nobody's born a Christian. We all must be born again. There's no separate way for the Jews to be saved even. And what a heinous thing this dual covenant theology is. It's basically spiritual anti-Semitism to tell the Jews they could be saved by keeping the law, when the law had within it no provision for the saving of the human soul. And that's why Paul would write, the law kills, and points out that we're transgressors of it. And therefore, we all need a Savior. The Jews need to be saved by Jesus, the King of the Jews, and all the Gentiles do as well. So, well, that's it for this week. And again, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. And thanks to all. We're getting close to the release of The Time of the Signs. As a matter of fact, I got my author's copy. This is the actual book. They send you out mock-ups so you can display the cover and do photo shoots and all that. But this is the actual book. It hot off the press, so to speak. And so we're getting close to the release date, January 16th. So if you haven't pre-purchased it yet, it'd be great if you did, and get the visibility up on Amazon and other platforms. So I think this is a book that people in the world need to read, because it just reminds you, hey, the Bible says it's living and powerful, and the signs of the last days are one of the many proofs that it's true. So, well, that's it for this week. And again, great to have you back, and to be back with you, I should say, and looking forward to all that God has in store as he seeks to use all of us to seek and save those who are lost through the power of the Holy Spirit in us. Well, God bless you, and we'll see you here, there, or in the air.